Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. This is Non-Linear Existentialism, Special Topic 3, MAFTEO Analysis, describing the theoretical relationship between schizophrenia, autism, and generalized anxiety. Here's the overview. Because we have a short amount of time, please peruse the overview, but it's basically in the sections of describing non-linear existentialism, its dimensions, then showing at MAFTEO Analysis the two-dimensional representation of the dimensions, then comparing functionality between the DSM-IV-TR and MAFTEOs, then going through the developmental stages that have been discussed before, then showing the definitions of schizophrenia, autism, and generalized anxiety as given by the DSM, and then contrasting these to MAFTEOs, and showing this in a description using MAFTEOs to show how schizophrenia, autism, and generalized anxiety compare to each other, and the treatment and possible conclusion. From occasion, I'm going to be making comments, but please read this at your leisure. And if you have any questions, please contact me. Thank you very much. Basically, nonlinear existentialism has the following dimensions that have been discussed in previous YouTube presentations and also in the various reference documents and papers that are written to give the formalized overview of the theory. And they are going to be interference, which goes from time to thought, amplitude and frequency modulation, as well as this signal, which is going to be basically the potential for making patterns and the patterns themselves. And an interface is going to be basically interaction between developed cortical patterns, and this is the residual incongruencies. Then we have differences and conflicts between the standards, and the result is going to be the cortical energy, which is going to be the driving overview driving cause to have these residual incongruencies resolved. MAFTEOs, it basically stands for multidimensional adaptive functional transitioning energy optimizing space. As shown in this diagram, the important part of this diagram is the external internal that's shown in the change in RI. Basically, this is illustrating a change from quality to quantity that was discussed previously, and the idea is that the internal standard, which does not actually exist at the beginning, is in conflict with an external actual standard. So the non-formalized internal is conflict with the external standard, which does exist, and this leads to residual incongruencies, which is in the green. And later on, the internal formalized standard does exist, but at that time it's actually trying to resolve in orange the green residual incongruencies that occurred beforehand. At the bottom we have the change in I over S, which is the change in interference to signals, and this occurs at various levels, but the ratio is the most important thing. So at the maximum and minimum levels, basically we have different ratios, and a maximum, just as an example, that we have the same ratio. So at the bottom it could be 10 out of 10, at the top 1,000 out of 1,000, both are giving 1, but one having a higher functionality than the other one. Here we have DSM-IV compared to MAFTEOs, and here we have stage 1, 2, and 3, and just gives an overview of how PNBAL moves away, the line moves away from the primary needs baseline activity level, going downwards as reflection non-optimal wants baseline activity level. And you can see in the following diagrams how this occurs. Stage 1, basically what happens is that the energy level is highest in the middle, as you can see, even though there's minimum thought, but because of the relationship with not having a formalized internal standards, which we have at the very top, this allows for there still to be high amounts of RI, even though RI does not exist per se because the patterns are not formalized, but residual incongruency does exist in the system, even though patterns does not exist. And here basically what happens is that the change in I over S does increase, because now we have patterns leading to the possibility of interference occurring with them, so that increases the I over S ratio. But because of the RI residual incongruencies occurring, the cortical energy is suboptimal below 100, so we still have no non-optimal wants the baseline activity level. And then here that this is resolved, and what's important in this one is that as long as the change in RI ratio is is balanced with a change in the I/S ratio, we can still achieve 100% cortical energy, which we have at the very top to the left. Here we have the clinical definition of schizophrenia, and it basically says there's inadequacies in sensory input, and we'll discuss how that relates to MAFTEOs later on. Please go over this in detail. I've highlighted things in red. Again, this is not from the DSM by myself, and just show that there is a relationship between autistic disorders and schizophrenia. And for this MAFTEOs, and I'm comparing schizophrenia, autism, and anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and seeing how they're in a continuum and how they relate to a change in I/S. And that'll be shown graphically later on. And this is autism. Basically, with autism, there's a lack of social interactions, and you'll be argued later on this is because, again, there's a problem with the ratio of I/S, and this does not allow for the individual to understand the social nuances, which can be arrived at if you have more flexibility as a reflection of having more interference, a functional level of interference in your thought processes, which are thought processes. And again, just going on with the idea of apparently inflexible adherence to specific non-functional routines or rituals. Again, they lack flexibility because not enough interference, again, which reflects the thought. And generalized anxiety disorder, which are the previous ones, are a result of not enough interference to the ratio of the signal. This one is that there's too much interference, and that leads into the system being unstable and being irritable and having difficulty in general, as opposed to axis 1 disorders, which is going to be specific anxieties because of specific patterns that are created, and these will be reflected in the residual incongruency. So you've got one set of disorders, anxiety disorders, which is a generalized anxiety disorder, which is a reflection of too much interference, and that's just going to be an inherent quality of the system. And another type of disordered anxiety disorder, where it's reflected in axis 1 disorders, which is going to be to a specific event or something like weight or serious illness, something that can be defined. So MAFTEO Analysis just argues that schizophrenia is due to an inadequate binding of sensory input, and this is because there's not enough basic noise, which is a type of interference, which that noise can turn into thought, and again, both of these are going to be a form of interference. Autism, binding occurs, but again, the V1B signal frequency is inadequate, and it doesn't allow for the individual to have enough thought, enough flexibility in their thought, which in itself is thought, to understand the nuances which everyone else, well, the better majority of the individuals in the society with an average level of I/S would understand. They don't understand it because their I/S ratio is too low. Generalized anxiety, again, is going to be to the left of the maximum amount, where the other ones were around the minimum. And what happens with this one is that the individual has too high of a level of interference. So even though the thought processes are very quick and they can see patterns that other individuals can't, it is offset certainly by the amount of anxiety, which is going to be instability in the cortical patterns, and they cannot concentrate or focus because these underlying pattern independent interference is something inherent in the system. We can see this one. A is going to be schizophrenia, B is going to be autism, and C, as you can see to the left of maximum, is going to be anxiety, and it's non-pattern related. Treatments, the various treatments is going to be either going to be increasing, decreasing I or S, so you have a balance between the maximum and minimum. And given this, what you're looking for is balance, and also being able to, if you're achieving 100% cortical energy or close to it, then it has to also be offset by the amount of RI, residual incongruencies, which were shown in the previous diagram. Conclusions, MAFTEO's graphic relates non-linear existentialism and its dimensions and present standards, which is the DSM. It also provides a complementary means of understanding, measuring, and treating mental illness. And third, in theory, MAFTEO's analysis can be applied to any cognitive condition. Previously, we did this with psychopathy in number 1, special topic number 1. Number 2 was borderline disorder, and these three were given schizophrenia, autism, and anxiety disorder because they're easily related, and also shows the benefits of MAFTEO's analysis. If you have any questions, please check the other YouTube presentations, or please look at www.charitiesoflife.com for the previous presentations and the papers that give background in this subject. I thank you very much for your time. Take care.